Hello everyone, it's Tuesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. The Camp David Trilateral Summit was not just a historic moment in enhancing security ties, but also a meeting that opened up a new chapter in economic security cooperation. Finance ministers will start holding meetings annually, and the three countries decided to launch an early warning system to prevent possible global supply chain disruptions. In addition, cooperation on critical and emerging technologies was included in their agreements. To take a closer look at the robust economic ties between the three countries that were agreed to through the recent summit, we have invited Professor Yang Jun-sok from the Catholic University of Korea. Professor Yang, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here.
Good evening. And we also have Jeff Moon, president of China Moon Strategies, LLC. Mr. Moon is also a former assistant U.S. trade representative for China. Good to see you, Mr. Moon.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
All right, good to have you with us. Now, allow me to give you first question, Mr. Moon. Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo agreed to hold trilateral summits annually, as well as meetings between national security advisors and ministers. But what is noticeable is that they also decided to launch a trilateral finance ministers meeting for the first time. What significance does this have?
The decision to launch a trilateral finance ministers meeting reflects the broad ambition and, frankly, the courage of the leaders as they expand trilateral cooperation to a wide range of regional and global issues. The summit joint statement says that even as the three countries deepen their security partnership, they also want to maintain focus on building robust cooperation in the economic security and technology spheres to leverage the unique capabilities of each of the three countries. So during the bilateral meeting between Presidents Biden and Yoon, the two leaders also confirmed their desire to continue close collaboration to fortify and strengthen multiple commercial sectors. Increasing economic cooperation is impossible without extensive coordination between finance ministries, so it makes sense that the trilateral summit commitments include regular meetings of finance ministers.
All right, I see your point. Now, Professor Yang, the three leaders acknowledged the importance of deepening their existing trilateral economic security dialogue. Now, what role has this dialogue played up till now, and how is it expected to be enhanced?
Well, the economic security dialogue came out from the November 2022 meeting at Phnom Penh, the summit of U.S., Korea, and Japan, and the top-level economic security officials met for the first time in this summit in Honolulu, Hawaii in February. And they talked about critical and emerging technologies such as quantum and space technologies, increasing supply chain resilience for semiconductors, batteries, and critical minerals. And they also talked about data security, and how to protect technology and data from arising economic interdependence. So basically, I wouldn't say that it's a general economic meeting. It was very much concerned with economic security, high technology, data, and new emerging technologies. But it is a forum where they can discuss these new technologies and perhaps new standards and new regulations that will inevitably follow.
Right, I see. So it was first agreed at Phnom Penh, and soon we are going to witness how it is going to be enhanced. Now, Mr. Moon, as one of the ways to strengthen economic security ties, the leaders agreed to launch an early warning system to enhance cooperation on possible supply chain disruption. What exactly is this EWS?
This pilot early warning system will strengthen supply chain resilience by identifying priority products and materials, things like critical minerals and rechargeable batteries, and establishing mechanisms to rapidly share information and react to real or potential disruptions. This new trilateral system is designed to complement and to enhance the existing early warning system with the EU and the arrangement with Asian partners through the Indo-Pacific Economic Partnership, or IPEF, that's currently under active negotiation and could be announced by the end of this year. The IPEF negotiators announced in May that they had substantially concluded negotiations on an EWS that will include a supply chain council and a response network that will collaborate on sector-specific action plans for key sectors and goods, as well as an emergency communications channel enabling the 14 IPEF partners to more effectively respond to disruptions. So I expect that the EWS established at the Trilateral Summit is likely to include these and a variety of other features.
Right, I see. So it's basically to enhance the global supply chain resilience. Now, Professor Yang, with such a measure in place, media outlets say the most powerful economic bloc representing around 1/3 of the world economy has been launched, and that such a body might bring change to the global industrial and economic landscape. How do you see this?
Okay, well, U.S. is about 25% of global economy. Japan is about 6%. Korea is about 2%. So added together, that's about 1/3 of the economy. So they are right in that aspect. But it's not entirely clear to me whether this can be considered a new economic bloc. The three countries do not share a single FTA. Korea has a U.S.-Korea FTA, and Korea and Japan both belong to the Asian plus 6 trading bloc, trading FTA with China, but we do not share a single FTA. It could have happened with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but the United States withdrew, and they do not, at least for now, seem to be interested in getting back. So this summit talked about high-tech industries. It talked about new technologies. It talked about economic and security. It talked about finance, securities and international finance. It did not talk a lot about traditional economics. It did not talk about things like steel quota, which still Korea still has imposed. So I'm not sure if we can, at least for now, call this a new powerful economic bloc. What it definitely will do, though, is that because these are new industries and because these three countries are leading players in those new industries, that it might be easier to cooperate. It might be easier to share new standards, new regulations on things like AI or electric vehicles. So it can be very productive, but for now, at least, it seems to be very limited to the economic security aspect and new technologies and new industries.
Right. So though it could be beneficial for all of the three countries, it could be quite a stretch to call it as an economic bloc. But Mr. Moon, many experts say the semiconductor supply chain system is expected to benefit the most from this measure, as the three countries could complement each other. Is this really so?
Well, South Korea, Japan, and the U.S. all have prominent roles in the semiconductor industry, so there's a lot at stake here. The sector is unique because semiconductors are essential in modern life. The process for producing them is extremely complicated, and the supply chain is global, with no single country dominating all aspects. Enhancing supply chain coordination is critical because we've seen in recent years extreme shortages and gluts in semiconductor availability. Potential concerns and problems include both natural factors, such as COVID, as well as man-made obstacles, such as China's recent restrictions on critical minerals, such as gallium and germanium. So better coordination between nations that have leading roles in the field can only help to enhance resilience and prosperity.
All right, I see. Now, moving on to the trilateral cooperation on so-called the critical and emerging technology. Professor Yang, why is cooperation in these tech sectors so important, and how would this joint research programs look like?
Okay, well, typically, if you have joint projects like this, researchers all come together and there's a financing available so that these researchers can get together and collaborate on projects. There has been mentioned that national laboratories, national research institutes will be allowed to coordinate with each other and research with each other. So that is something that I think is very exciting. Having said that, why is this important? Well, because these are new industries and standards and regulations are just being started out. Say, taking things like, say, AI. AI needs to learn from existing material that are in the internet. You have a strike out in Hollywood right now arguing about some of these very issues, whether the AI can learn from these materials without paying any compensation to people who have created them already? Do you have rights to, say, your appearance? Do you have rights to works when AI collaborates? All of these will be very important for economic development in the future, and a lot will depend on what kind of rules and regulations are set right now. Traditionally, because Korea was a follower, we didn't really have a lot of voice in setting these global regulations, global standards, but this tripartite framework that they develop now, I believe, can play a role in setting these standards for the future, and Korea will have a major voice in it.
Right, sounds exciting. But developing these new technologies is, of course, important, but what's also important is to protect them, right? So, Mr. Moon, in order to protect technologies from being illegally exported or stolen, the three countries will begin exchanges between U.S. Disruptive Technology Strike Force and its Korean and Japanese counterparts. Now, why did the U.S. create such a task force, and how is such cooperation expected to go?
The U.S. Justice and Commerce Departments announced last February the creation of the Disruptive Technology Task Force, and the idea was to pool the resources of various agencies in the fight against persistent efforts by some countries to steal advanced technologies and use them illegally for commercial or military purposes. So the task force focuses on about a dozen American metropolitan areas. It includes U.S. attorneys, Commerce Department export control officers, the FBI, and the Department of Homeland Security. Both South Korea and Japan face similar challenges involving technology theft, and there are cases involving technology theft in both of those countries. So the decision of the leaders at the Trilateral Summit to work together in response to this problem, I think, is a welcome step that will benefit all three countries as they try to protect advanced technologies.
Right, a welcoming step. But Mr. Moon, many of the agreements seem to me it is an attempt to bolster ties against China's so-called economic coercion. What's your view on this?
South Korea, Japan, and the United States are all well aware of Chinese economic coercion. I'm sure viewers in South Korea remember, for example, the punishing boycotts China launched against South Korea in 2017 when Seoul wanted to defend itself by deploying THAAD missiles. China has increasingly resorted to economic coercion in recent years to defend real or perceived interests. So countries in Asia and Europe want to share cooperation, share information, and push back. So I just think that the Trilateral Summit announcement in this regard is just the latest development in that trend.
Right, I see. But Mr. Moon, just before the Trilateral Summit, China gave the green light to resume group tours to 78 countries, including South Korea, for the first time in 6 years. Now, what does such a move suggest?
Well, I think there could be a couple of factors at play. First of all, China's middle class wants to have opportunities to travel abroad, and the Chinese government ought to give them those opportunities. Second, if you look at this from a more cynical perspective, suspending foreign travel and cutting off tourist revenue for other countries has traditionally been one of the common forms of Chinese economic coercion, and that has happened in the case of Korea as well. So by permitting tourist travel to resume, China simply regains a retaliatory option that it lost during the pandemic and will now be able to use whenever convenient. So the answer is it depends how you look at it.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Yang, what the discussions did not include was any mention of the Inflation Reduction Act or the release of Fukushima wastewater. Since we are focusing on economic issues right now, let's look at the IRA. August 16th marked 1 year since the IRA was signed into law. Now, what impact did it have on South Korean EV makers since then?
Well, not much. A lot of the fears that we had last year were not realized. First of all, the electric vehicle exports, they actually rose somewhat. If you take the U.S. import figures, imports of EVs from Korea actually went up compared to September 2021 to August 2022, it was $1.9 billion. September 22 to August 2023, it was $3.2 billion. So the exports of electric vehicles actually rose quite a bit, and that's because the Biden administration ruled that while for consumer purchases of vehicles, you needed vehicles to be produced, assembled in North America. For commercial vehicles, they would still get the subsidies even if the vehicle was not assembled in North America. So Korea has been rebalancing its exports more toward vehicles for leasing rather than vehicles that are sold to consumers. And then for EV batteries, the total battery exports rose slightly. You can argue that perhaps it did not rise as much as it could have. But on the other hand, for cathodes, which is a part used in batteries, that rose significantly. Overall, exports rose by about 67%, and exports of cathodes to United States rose about 178%. And that's because the U.S. Department of Commerce ruled that the cathodes will not be counted on whether the batteries were made in the United States or North America or not. So Korean-made cathodes can be used in American assembled batteries and be still counted as an American. So we have seen a really incredible increase in cathode exports. So at least for now, a lot of the fears that we may have about electric vehicle exports declining, electric vehicle battery industry being affected, that has not really taken place. So Korea is, in some sense, over-worried, at least so far.
All right, I see. I mean, it's good to hear that there wasn't much of an impact on South Korean EV makers, but Professor Yang, still concerns exist as Korean battery makers still heavily depend on China for around 90% of core minerals such as lithium hydroxide. Will South Korea be able to reduce this risk?
Well, it entirely depends on whether we can get alternate sources. The reason that we get it from China is because, first, they're close. Second, they are major producers. And third, it's cheap. Now, can we get the same conditions elsewhere? There is a lot of doubt. While China is not the only source for these rare materials, usually China is the easiest source to get it because other countries, either it is very expensive to mine them or they have environmental regulations which makes mining of these rare earths very difficult. So will Korea get affected? Well, if we can find alternate sources, and this is one of the things that the supply chain security aspect of this tripartite meeting is supposed to do, but can we get it as cheaply? That I have some questions on.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Moon, overall, South Korea is making a clear and decisive preference for the U.S. over China in both security and economic aspects. But as we have talked about it earlier, South Korea is not in a position to overlook economic ties with China. And so, in what direction should Seoul go in terms of economic ties with Beijing?
Well, Biden administration officials have commented that the U.S. has enjoyed many decades of cooperation separately with both South Korea and Japan. And the only thing that's changed at the summit was that bilateral cooperation has expanded to become trilateral cooperation. In addition, that cooperation is not targeted at anyone else, but rather is intended to advance a common positive vision of an Indo-Pacific region that's free, open, secure, and prosperous. That affirmative trilateral agenda does not prevent South Korea from maintaining economic relations with China. In fact, China used to be South Korea's largest export market until recently when the U.S. replaced China in that regard. The South Korean government has done a good job, I think, of balancing relations with China against relations with market economies, and I expect it's going to continue to do so.
Right, I see. Well, Professor Yang, I'd like to ask you this same question as well. How should Seoul maintain economic ties with Beijing?
Well, I think we are never going to have a case where China is not Korea's major trading partner. Usually, trade volume depends on economic size and distance, and China is one of the two largest economies, and it's located virtually right next door. The problem is whether Korea whether Korea is over-dependent on China because it's such an easy market for Korean companies to develop. And I think the last few years have shown us that perhaps we become too over-dependent on China, that whenever we have problems with China, both politically or economically, that affects Korea perhaps too much. So we need a bit of a distance between Korea and China, and I think this is one way of getting it, but can we ever eliminate China as a major trading partner? I don't think so.
Right, I see. Well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor Yang and Mr. Moon, for your time and insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.